What's up, humans? Welcome back to the Human Music Podcast. I am Luke Rain, and this is episode 83, Slowform on finishing an album. This week, our guest again is the one and only Slowform. The Colorado-based deep dub producer just dropped her debut album on the Producer Dojo label and has had multiple official remixes released as well. We asked her about the process of completing an album, stereo imaging, pushing techniques to the limit so you can find where the balance is, taking time away from tracks, working on songs in batches, writing remixes, her favorite tunes on the new album, and what inspires her new tracks. The song of the week is the first track off the album, Slowform, Tune In, and we got links below so you can go listen to that and the rest of the album and buy the album. Please go buy it on Beatport. Currently it's sitting number 1 in deep dub, but we're trying to get it to run up the charts because it's already in the top 50 overall. Let's get that stuff in the top 10. Please support our sponsors while you're down there looking at those links. Dojo TV, that's where we recorded this episode and where people were able to ask questions in the private Discord chat. It's free producer live stream classes from the Producer Dojo Senseis. No reason not to jump in there. Then there's the weekly download. If you want to learn from Il Gates, our mentor, in his private weekly group lessons and get access to over 250 more episodes in the archive for just $20 a month. And of course, guest practices, where you can learn from Seth Drake at the Approach Institute. He's the best engineer we know, and your first class over there is free. No reason, again, not to go take a free class from the best engineer we know. You can find more episodes, our socials, and even some free sound packs over at thehumanmusicpodcast.com. And with that, let's get on into the episode.
Hello, people of Earth. This is Tesco with Rip Kenny and Trap Jesus, and you're listening to the Human Music Podcast. Woo!
Human Music Podcast. I like it. All right, what's up, humans? What's up, ninjas? What's up, Dojo TV?
Yo.
What's good?
The Human Music Podcast is here with one of our favorite humans, Slowform. What's up, Slowform?
Hey.
How you doing?
What up?
Hey, doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, super happy to have you. Not only just a little stat for the listeners out there, your first interview is actually our most popular episode that we have ever had. And so just wanted to give you mad props on that. You had such a dope episode that the people keep listening to it. And
that's awesome.
And not only that, you're coming off of a big milestone. Your debut album just dropped on the Producer Dojo label. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's exciting.
All right.
So we were chatting about this a little bit before we went live, but let's start with how long ago did you start this album, and when did you think it was going to be done?
Yeah, so it's definitely been a process. Total it came together in about a year. It was about a year's work, but that's kind of loosely because releasing. Originally, I thought it was going to be an EP, and that was the goal since joining day one, 3-4 years ago. So a year that all the songs were created, but definitely more time getting to that initial point. But yeah, I was saying, so it was around this time last year that I handed in my draft of my EP at the time, which was a 5-track EP. And I sent it over to Dylan, and he immediately was like, yeah, I think this is good to go, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting a bunch of back and forth and several months of work. So I was really shocked by that. But right around that time, it was a few weeks to a month from when I submitted it to when he got back to me. And like in that month, I had learned a lot about mixing, especially. And so I was like, you know what, like, let me dive back into these mix downs. I know I can make them better. So I did that. And then during that process, I wrote like a few other tunes. And I was like, man, like, I'm still just like really figuring out my sound and like progressing a lot to where like these songs that I wrote that I was like stoked on at the time, I was like, I don't know if they really represent me as much anymore. And like, you know, you're always going to be growing and your music will be evolving, but like I was still making like really big gains, I felt like. So I redid those mix downs and then like turned in another draft like a few months later with like a few new tunes on there. And then that's when and then he had like some feedback on those. So I went back, you know, another month or so passed, turned it back in. And this was like March of 2020, March or April or 2021. And that's when he was like, so these are good, but now I think we're looking at an album. So he's like, so I want, you know, he's like, it would be nice to have like a couple, like one or two interludes to break it up and like a vocal track or like a remix. And so went back to the drawing board with that, and was working on it and just like went back to writing a bunch of new stuff again. Cause like those previous months I had been really in like mixed down and like polishing mode. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm like have more time and, you know, he wants more songs on there, I'll go back into like writing mode, which is my favorite. So I wasn't upset about that. And so I was like just writing a bunch of new stuff. And that was like a couple months passed by doing that. And I knew the Q4 deadline was like, I knew the date for that. It was like August 20th or whatever. And so I had that in mind and I was trying to make that because I was like, I would love to have it out by the end of the year. And, you know, it was coming closer and closer. And I told myself, I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to make it. That's okay. Like, we're going to shoot for Q1 of 2022. Like, those extra, you know, 2-3 months will be plenty. And I was like set on that. And then literally like a day or two after I had made that decision on my, you know, to myself, Sean hit me up and was like, hey, I want to talk to you about your album. Can we hop on a Zoom? It's like, oh man, okay.
Sean being Spider
So
Hound,
linked up with him and he was like,
A&R, the Dojo label.
yeah.
Shout out, Sean.
Woo.
Big ups.
Yeah. So I chatted with him and he was like, so Dylan wants your album for the Q4 deadline. And this was like a month, 4 or 5 weeks before the deadline.
Of course.
None of the songs were done. None of the songs. There were like 5 of the songs were written, but I had to redo the mix downs for like an 8th time. Because again, I just like keep learning things that it's like, oh,
Gotta love that.
That's not the best practice for doing that. I can make that sound better. Yeah. So there's that. And then the other 5 songs were like the initial first draft sketch. None of the like detailing, none of the. So I said, I'll try. Wasn't really too sure if I was going to be able to make that or not. And so for those like 4 to 5 weeks, it was like go 6 a.m. to midnight every day, all day, like mix downs, so many mix downs. And I mean, I barely pulled it off. I had like a few days to spare. But like, I was talking to Sean about this and like, I'm really glad that I had that deadline because otherwise like I would still be working on it now. You know, I would still be like tweaking with shit and like, there's probably some stuff I could have improved because like I said, like in the, you know, just the past few months, I've learned a lot too. And like, especially with mixing and just like better practicing and stuff. But I also feel like there's probably things that I would have like made worse from just overworking them and like just trying to perfect it. So like, I was glad I had that deadline and, you know, it was just like, okay, this is a snapshot in time. This is, you know, just a chapter of my life. Like my music's obviously just going to keep evolving and stuff. But yeah, so it was about a year. Like the oldest song on the album is Get Lost. And I wrote that one August 2020. And then so turned it all in like the final draft of August 2021. So about a year, but yeah.
Honestly, I
Yeah.
thought the
So
funniest
a
part
lot of
about this
work
time,
went into that.
yeah, the funniest
What's
part
that?
about this timeline that we chatted about before we hopped on was that, like, almost exactly a year ago when you were on the podcast, you were like, yeah, the EP, it's basically done. It's gonna be coming out like real soon. And then the process of like that, and in your mind, like it was basically done, and like that turning into a whole nother year
Mm-hmm.
of work is just like hilarious. Every producer can relate to that. Like, oh yeah, it's almost done, and then like that last 5% is another
Yep.
year. Like, oh my god,
A classic tale.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, no, I'm literally on that podcast was like, yeah, look out for it early 2021 because I thought it was just another month or two of work.
yeah.
So I'm curious, like, what were the couple things that you learned in that time period that made it that worth it for you to go back and touch up all these tunes and add that extra year of work?
Yeah, so it like half of it was mixed down stuff. 'Cause that was when like I was really getting into the approach stuff with like Seth Drake, his courses and stuff. And so a lot of like stereo imaging and a lot of just like getting the low end, like having a better understanding of like marrying the kick and sub and like what else was there? And I feel like because then it would be like I redid some of those mix downs. Like some of them I just did once, like the more recent ones. But some of those older ones like get lost. I mean, I probably redid it like 8 or 9 times because it just, I'd redo it. And then I find a lot of times like I'll learn something and I'll apply it, but I'll apply it like way too much. And then it's like, okay, now go back and like dial it back in. Like I went, I learned about stereo imaging, so I went like crazy on it and everything's super wide. And then like a few weeks later, Dylan had a weekly download on, stereo imaging and how if you have everything so pushed out, like you're kind of like defining the limits of the mix. And like by pulling everything in a little bit, it actually makes everything kind of feel bigger. So I like redid the mix downs with all the stereo and making everything super wide. And then that weekly downloads the following week, and it's like, okay, now I have to like undo everything I did to an extent. So
Yeah. I like one of the things that I frequently got asked about the EP that I did on the dojo when I was teaching students is like, I guess like some parts like felt really wide, and it wasn't even really something that I was super intentional on at the time. But when I was sound designing a lot of the stuff for those, I would always have like, when I was doing the mud pies, I'd have some stuff that was like just one voice on both oscillators, and then I would like, as in the middle of the mud pie, I would like turn the voices up to like 7 or whatever, and so I'd have some sounds wide and some sounds mono. And then when I was like putting those together, I realized that like stuff sounds wider after it like you play a mono sound and then you play like a full stereo sound. Like that full stereo sound seems way wider, like because the contrast to the sound that came before it. And like that was just such a huge aha moment for stereo imaging for me. And like, you don't like, it's so easy to take a technique and be like, oh my god, like why doesn't everything should be like this because it makes it better, right? And like that is totally the process of learning literally anything in music production. You're like, oh my god, it makes it so like sausage fattener, it makes all the sounds so much better, I'm just gonna put it on everything. And like,
I mean, true.
year one, you're like, holy shit, sausage fattener on everything is great. And then you realize, I think I might have overdone that one a little bit. But that's the process. You have to go through that in order to learn and grow and move forward.
Yeah, it's just like putting any one effect on, sound like an EQ, if you're going to put that sound on there, you got to like, or a filter, you got to like, okay, where does that filter take way too much out? And then where can I not hear it working at all? And then where does it sound best in between those two spots? I found my range of efficacy. Now I've got to figure out where it works best. And I think you're right, Evan, like so many producer techniques end up having to follow that type of line where it's like, okay, I'm doing none of this. I'm doing all of this. And then, oh yeah, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. I'm curious.
That's what
So
I've
speaking of like the,
gotten into a habit.
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You're the important person in this conversation.
Okay. No, I was just gonna say, based off of Luke, what you were saying, like I've gotten into like a good habit of doing that when I'm writing, like whenever I'm applying like any effect or process, like it's helpful, yes, to know where you want things to like end up to like push it super far, but also just like pushing things like to where they break so that you're like, okay, this doesn't sound good to me. Like, so that you know that like limit. Because if you're just like, gently applying things, like you're not really like sure, a little bit doesn't like ruin a sound or anything. And so like pushing stuff all the way to that point so then you can like pull it back and like get that good balance.
Yeah,
That is
absolutely.
that is so important. Like that honestly, that's something I would tell my students all the time about like saturation or distortion. Like you'll never know how far too much is until you get to too much, and then you're like, cool, 20 dBs on the saturator blows it out. And then go down. Like if you're trying to find the limit of something, like back it down until it sounds good. I mean, it's the same thing with mastering, honestly. You're like, how loud can I make it? Well, turn that limiter up to the point where it starts to splat and be garbagey, and then bring it down from there until it's no longer garbagey. And then that's the limit of your current mix. And then like maybe you turn it back up and like see what are the first things to break. And if you need it to be louder, then you can go and like kind of massage those things that are breaking until they're no longer breaking. And then you can kind of massage it up from there. But you never know what the limit is until you go too far. That is such an important technique. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was you were talking about the deadline looming for your album, and how after a year of working on it, or at least something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is kind of like as I'm finishing a body of work as well, and one thing that I've really struggled with is being confident in the decisions that I'm making, knowing that this huge body of work is coming to a conclusion, right? Like struggling to like be confident that this is the choice that's going to get it to 100%, and like A-being stuff way too much and just spending too much time on every decision. A, did you deal with that? And like, how did it affect your process? And B, like working with that deadline, do you think it helped or hurt that?
Yeah, so to answer the first one, I think it was helpful that so like I said, like I turned in the EP, like went back and forth a couple times after I did like some initial like mix sound changes, and then he was like, okay, I want this to turn into an album. So there was about like 3 months maybe that I didn't touch like any of those original tunes that were on. Like there's like Get Lost and Take Two, and which others, a couple others that I like didn't open the project of for like 2 to 3 months, because that was the time that I was like more focused on writing new stuff to fill those like few open spots. And so I think that was really helpful, because those were, like I said, the mix downs I spent the most time on, just because they're like the oldest tunes. So I would, learn new stuff and want to go out and apply that. So having like such a good like long break away from those for a while was really helpful, because then when I like actually did revisit them after, it was like, no, you have a month to like finish it, I was coming back with a fresh perspective, fresh ears. So that definitely helped a lot. And what was your other question you asked about?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a leading question, because I know for me, like a deadline helps like put pressure on like being more final with your decision making. So did you experience that?
Yeah, I definitely think no, like I'm certain the deadline helped, because like I said, I had kind of made the decision, oh, I won't have it done in time. Like I need another like 3 months to get it there. And clearly I didn't actually, like, I mean, that 5-week stretch of like getting it all done was brutal and stressful, and I didn't sleep much, but like it needed to be done because I mean I've written a bunch of stuff since then, and it's like all of those songs wouldn't have been written if I were still like tweaking over these mix downs and like trying to perfect things, which, you know, it's impossible to ever get anything like perfect. So having that deadline really made me be like, okay, what's the most important thing to like focus on right now? Like I literally don't have time to like get caught up in these like super fine details. So it was just like, okay, today you're working on these 3 songs. Okay, then tomorrow you're working on like these 3. And it was just like, you know, one day at a time, like working on all those and just like knowing I had that looming ahead. Because otherwise, I mean, I definitely would still be working on it right now.
Yeah. One thing that you just mentioned,
unlimited time gives you unlimited opportunity to keep going, and like you said, there's a possibility of just messing up your tracks if you keep working on them forever. You're saying, Evan?
Yeah, work expands to fill the time allotted. It is such a universal truth. One of the things you said though is like, I'm working on these 3 songs today. That's one thing that I've found that and you know, you tell me if you agree, but when you're nearing the finish line of like working on a bunch of songs, like you've heard them so many times and you have all these other ones you also need to finish, like it's pretty beneficial actually to like spend 30 minutes working on a single song and you're like, okay, I've got this to the point where I'm like not hearing anything sticking out or like whatever, and then just like bounce that and then do an hour on the next one and 45 minutes on the next one, maybe 15 minutes on that one that you've been struggling with forever because your ears are so blown out on it. Like cycling through and just iterating and just moving on, next one. Even though you're not making a ton of progress each time, you're spending way less time going backwards, way less time diving into the weeds too far on any one thing. And it helps push the batch way closer to actually being done.
Totally. It was super helpful doing that too for me because like a lot of those like last things were mixed down related. And so like if I was working on a tune and then I would switch to another and then I could like tell like huge discrepancies in the mix downs between the two where it's like, oh man, yeah, this snare like sucks after like listening to this other one, or like this kick isn't like hitting nearly as hard as like this other one. So it's like a good kind of like a reference in a way, but then it also helps make, I feel like, the body of work like more cohesive together because you're really like applying like, you know, you're coming at it with the same mindset.
Yeah, I love what you just said there, like being able to recognize because you bounced from this song back to this song to that song, you get to hear 3 different tunes in context. And you're like, wow, those first 2 had really solid snares and I didn't think about it at all. And now that I get to the 3rd song, I realize this snare doesn't stack up to the other 2. And if you just stick in one song for too long, that's just the snare. It's what a snare sounds like to you now. And there's no comparison. And I think it's similar to what you were talking about earlier, like getting to take some time away from the original EP batch as you were writing the rest of the album. And because like sticking with the songs that you just wrote for too long, you're the exact same skill level as a producer as you were when you started writing, you know, when you wrote these songs. And if you stay on these songs trying to improve them, like you already wrote them as good as you could that week. And if you take time to go away, make other songs, make other mistakes, learn from them, watch more videos, learn those techniques, and then 3 months later, you come back, you're a 3 months better producer with all these new skills, your ear is improved, your concepts have improved, and you get to apply all those other songs worth of knowledge back to these songs. So I think that's a really valuable lesson for everybody listening. But yeah, I was also curious. You've got 2 remixes on the album that are super dope. I would love to hear, you know, what the process was like going through those remix contests, and then, you know, why it was chosen to put remixes on the album too.
Yeah, totally. So I guess I can start with the Cthulhu remix, which was brutal to write. Like I mentioned before, so yeah, most of my tracks like see maybe like anywhere from 10 to like 25 versions of saves, just like my method of like saving. That's like kind of an average. The Cthulhu remix was at like 42 or 43.
Oof.
I rewrote the first drop probably 10 times. Like I normally don't like normally I can tell if a song's working or not, and like I'll expand on the initial idea I have, but I normally, if like a drop's not working and I'm not like getting excited about it. And I'm not like, oh, it's there somewhere. It's just not there yet. But if it's like, no, this isn't working, I just, move on to the next idea. And the Cthulhu one, like it was decent where it was at when it was released on the Cypher. And like, I was proud of it at the time, but that was like a while ago. And then when, Dylan was like, I want you to put that on the album. It had been like 7-8 months. I was like, I wasn't really like thrilled with where I was at. Like, it just didn't feel like me, the initial version. And so I was like, okay, like, I mean, I would love to include it on there, but I definitely want to go back to the drawing board and like work on it some more. And so I rewrote, like, I was just trying to make the drop work with the sounds that I had and like the groove that I had. And it took like many sessions of just like banging my head against the wall to then finally be like, it's not working. Like, you need to just like delete everything from this. Like, I really like the second drop that stayed pretty much the same. Like, there's some mixing things, but that the composition of it stayed pretty much the same. But yeah, so I finally like deleted everything from the first drop and just did like several more writing sessions with taking like, weeks or a month off in between because it just like was not working. And this whole time, like it didn't come together. That was probably the one I was stressing out about the most with the deadline because it didn't come together until like a week or two. No, probably like a week when I turned in the album. Like Dylan kept asking, he's like, how's that coming along? And I was like, oh, it's coming, it's almost there. Like it wasn't almost there at all. Like it but I'm glad that I kept going with it because I really like how it turned out. But yeah, I was working on that one up until the last minute for sure. And then the Dream Tonic one, I had an absolute blast writing. That one was one that just like pretty much wrote itself. It seemed like, I listened to all of the tunes that she had up for remixing. And that one, like the vocals in it and the lines, just like connected with me the most. And so I was like, okay, like I'm going to do this one. Downloaded it, and I started out by like a lot of the melodies in that one are all like a lot of it is made up of her vocal that I like, pitched down and stretched and threw effects on. So like a lot of the melodies and atmospheres started from that. So that's how I kind of started it was, I took the vocal and then I was like, what can I do with this to make it, even feel more like the remix of the song. And so I just did a bunch of like resampling and found cool then like riffs kind of in the resampling that I used with the vocal. And that one just, I mean, I listened to it and immediately was like, yeah, this is the one I'm going to do. Cause like the first lines, she has the initial verse, and then it's like lead you through the dark. And I was like, ooh, I bet I could do like something cool with that at the drop, like at that moment. So that one like came together pretty easily. There was some back and forth with Dylan on that one, but that one came out, in a couple days of working on it. And then I was, really stoked because I was wanting to get at least one vocal track on the album. And I think it helps it, be like a well-rounded piece of work. Like it would feel like something was missing kind of without that on there, I feel. So it was just like a perfect timing that they did that remix opportunity then. And I actually did 2 remixes for that. And so Dylan was like, well, let's put one on the album and then the other one can do the remix EP. So that was a super fun one to work on.
Yeah, I remember you were talking about that Cthulhu remix. And I remember you saying, yeah, like you rewrote that first drop like 10 times. And when I listened to your album for the first time and I listened to that song, I was like, I remembered you saying that, and you couldn't have paid me to say that it sounded like you rewrote it 10 times. It felt like a cohesive song. So kudos to that. I think that awesome. Shows a great amount of skill in being able to like actually rework it and make it sound like the first draft or like the first pass, like sound natural with the rest of the song. But also the teachable moment there is like you have to be consistent with it. You have to like keep trying. Like I know your songwriting ethos of like making a song like every day. I know that this is nothing new to you to continue to write and rewrite. And I think that is something that is really important for people to hear, that like, you know, it can be really tough sometimes, it can suck, but if it's an important song, like you can get there. And I mean, hats off to you for pulling that off. I mean, the Dream Tonic one also sounded great and it sounded like very, very smooth, but if you said one of those I had to rewrite the first drop 10 times, I couldn't pick which one it was. So
yeah, and
well, that's good to hear.
And I was just saying,
it was just like forcing it. I was just like, I feel like the issue was I was just like forcing it so much. Like my initial idea I, had, and so the first one that came out on the Cypher, like it was, decent enough to be on the mixtape, and like it was good, but it just didn't feel me. And then when I tried to rewrite it, I like was doing like some cool sound design stuff, and I like made some really cool sounds that I was like, oh my gosh, this is for sure it. But it just like wasn't working, and I was just like trying to force it. And it really like made me, it wasn't until I like took a step back and was like, just like stop trying to force what you think is gonna work. Like, because I was like, oh, I made this like super cool sound, like this is definitely like the face of the first drop, and it just like wasn't working. It wasn't like dropping into it well. It just felt like awkward and not like cohesive. And I think like a lot of that rewriting was, I was rewriting but using like the same sounds and just trying to be like, oh, maybe it just needs like a different order, or maybe like the drums are just like not mixed the best. And it's like, no, it just like wasn't working. Like it's okay to delete stuff that's cool, but just maybe it isn't for that song, and try something that actually does like flow with the song and the idea.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things to do. We talk about like killing puppies, like, oh yeah, this is a cool part that I made, it's a cool sound or it's a cool riff, but if it doesn't really serve the song, then it can be really hard to kill it. But it's also important to remember, like you said, maybe it's just not for this song. Maybe you should just export it into like a folder of sparks or faces or loops or whatever it is, and just have it as a dope sample on hand for a later song. And I just wanted to say also that you nailed it. That shit works really well. That Cthulhu remix is awesome. On Saturday night, I opened for Illgates in Seattle, and I dropped it in my set early on in the night, and everybody was digging it. Everybody was grooving. And then actually later in the night, Dylan actually opened his set with it and gave you a big shout out and was like saying, everybody go listen to this album. It's so dope. Go follow Slowform, and dropped it again. And everybody got down again. Nobody seemed to mind that it got played twice in the night. Everybody was just digging it again. So shouts out.
Amazing.
Right?
That's so cool to hear. Like that's been show. Like that's like been a goal since like I started this, was like to have people in Illgates especially like playing my music. Like Evan, I literally remember at Shambhala that first year I met you, and he like closed his village stage set with one of your tunes, and it was like, especially at that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to like, I'm making tunes that are good enough to like be played out. Like what?
You're
yeah,
here.
that's still like the highlight of my life, maybe, like straight up. So I know, and I cannot wait until we're at the Village again, standing backstage, and he opens his set with your Cthulhu remix. That's gonna be fucking cool.
Yeah, shouts out to Shambhala and the Village stage.
Mm.
Boy, am I ready for that too.
Yeah.
I'm curious,
Right.
Katie. Since you went through a period where you were working with so many tracks that were at this like finished stage or almost done stage, what have you learned from that process, working on all those tunes, finishing the album, that you're now bringing to the earlier stages of these newer tunes?
Yeah, just I feel like my mixing got a ton better in those last few months, especially. That has helped now, like bringing that in sooner in the process, and just like also just like guiding my decisions when I am writing more so, because I know what I'll want to do or might want to do, later down the line. So like my mix, 'cause when I was working on that, and when I would like redo the mix downs and stuff, they would take anywhere from like 5 to 8 hours maybe to like sit down, and often I wouldn't do like an 8 hour mixing session. That'd be like 2 4 hour sessions or whatever, but like to redo a mix down would be that long. And now it's like maybe an hour or two to like fully take a track that has, yeah, and it just like also just like my hearing got better, like my what I was listening for, and just like way of listening, I think. Like I feel like I've gotten better with recognizing like when I'm losing audio fidelity, and like keeping sounds clean, and just like having a better understanding of that, I guess, really helped a lot.
We got a question from Sleazy Biscuits in the chat here, which kind of goes hand in hand with this. But they were asking about any suggestions for mixing, mixing chains, that kind of stuff. And they're saying they heard less is more, and that's what they're trying to lean towards. But they hear all these recent releases, and they're so big and wide. They've tried EQ and compression, but don't always do what they intend to maximize the sample. So they're asking how to get cleanliness and proper stereo imaging width.
Yeah, so my main piece of advice there would be, you're totally spot on with the less is more. A lot of times when I was going back and redoing mix downs, it was taking things off. It was never adding things. It was deleting things and turning things off. And like now, that's why I said, now that, a full mix down only takes like an hour or two, it's because I'm not doing a lot at all. It's like M Wave Shaper on everything pretty much. Like I abuse that because it works so fantastically. And then
Wave
some
was the
sort
plugin?
of like
Wave
stereo-
Shaper from Melda.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Dope.
Yes. Yeah. So like a lot of my sounds just have that. And then if it's a sound that I want to add stereo image to, my couple of go-tos are either doing like a grain delay at like a really small, like 5 to 10% maybe, or a regular delay that's again like 5 to 10%. Or if it's like a bass sound or like a wub that I'm trying to have like the low mids be wider, I'll do like group it in to where it's the dry signal, and then you have a signal that's just taking like the 200 to 500 range with like a bunch of like saturation or other things before that EQ. So you're like boosting the sound a lot, but then you're only taking those mids, and like leveling that against the dry signal. And then you can sometimes like do that with the highs too to get kind of like crispiness, like stereo imaging. I tend to sometimes just do it with the mids, but yeah, I really don't like do a ton of processing to my sounds.
Yeah, that's something Dylan
Yeah.
has
I mean, yeah.
really
Yeah, I
been
really
up
don't
on.
do anything all that fancy.
That's something
Yeah,
Dylan's
leveling
really
is
been
key.
hammering home lately is like, you know, EQ, basically every process that you put on a sound comes at a cost. It will give you something, but it will also take something away. And often that's like the clarity and the cleanliness of the sound. So, that's why starting with sound selection and making really good choices in your sound selection is so important. And if something's not working, consider like, maybe I just need a new sound. Like if the snare's not working, you could spend 9 hours trying to reprocess the snare, or you could try a better snare, and that might fix it in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Sleazy Biscuits, if I had to give you any words of advice, it would be that like for the longest time, like maybe 1 to 3 years into production, I would just break out every tool in the book to try and force the sounds I had into the perfect stereo spectrum. And then I would try and mono compatibility test it, and it would sound like garbage. And I would A/B to all these references. And I'm like, how does it sound the exact same in mono and wide? And it's like so crystal clear and the highs up wide. And like, what the heck am I doing wrong? It's because I didn't have the ear for sound selection when I was making the song. And nowadays, just like Luke said, just like what Katie touched on, when you start with the right sounds and you have the composition of sounds like sounding pretty solid before you even break out any tools, that is when you're able to achieve the sound you want by massaging things into place a little bit with your fine tools, right? Like the best sounding mix down you'll ever do is also the easiest because you didn't have to take out a jackhammer and try and break something apart and force it into some slot that you left yourself. It's because you didn't overcomplicate stuff. You didn't try and force things into the right spot. Like if you want a wide sound, like don't start with a mono sample and use some stereo imaging thing and break it apart and force it into the sides. Like start with a sound that has that width built in. Like in your serum patch, if you want it wide, you got to use more than one voice. Like, and once you start to realize those early on choices are really what determine the width and the quality of what you're making, then like it just happens so naturally. And you'll get to a point where you're like, wow, I can't believe how hard I worked to make a piece of crap early on. And now I hardly even have to work at it, knowing the types of things that work well together, knowing the problems to look out for, and it just ends up sounding better. So sound selection takes time to know what works, but it's like the most important thing for actually creating a cohesive, big, maximized sounding mix.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to prove that point, on Saturday when Dylan was in Seattle, we went to sound check, and then we went over to Metronome's house, and Dylan had like a little, like just barely the start of a drop loop that I think he had composed on the airplane. And, it was just like some sounds he had sampled off of his hardware stuff and put in a Sparks folder, and like a sub with M-Wave Shaper on it, and like a really simple drum beat. And then they got there and they made an intro together. And then they had me like freestyle a little bit and grabbed one of my rap lines for the pre-drop vocal. And then I had to go do my set. And by the time they showed up at the venue, they already had a playable version without middling around. If you haven't seen that awesome recent weekly download about not middling around and just focusing on, when you write the song, just make the intro, the drop, and the outro, and then play it out. And if people like it, then maybe go write the rest of the song. But they had just that one drop version of the track ready in like a couple of hours because they picked really good sounds and they didn't overcomplicate things and put way too much on the chain that was messing things up. So the proof is in the pudding right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you're finishing the best out of every 5 ideas you make instead of every single thing, really ups your quality.
Yeah. Amen.
Life hack.
Yeah. So, Katie, what, like, at this point, what are your favorite tunes on the album and why?
So my favorites are probably Tune In, Just Be, and Shadows. And those are actually, I'm realizing now, those are all the most recent ones. Like those were the last few that I wrote for it. So that could be why they're my favorite, because they're the most fresh out of all of them. And that always seems to be the case. Whatever I'm like working on the most recently is going to be my favorite thing. But yeah, so like Shadows was like the last one to be written, and that was one that I actually like had done like a quick sketch of like the day or two before Sean hit me up about the deadline and like wrapping stuff up. So I almost didn't finish that one because I was like, well, this still has like it had the beat and like the wubs and stuff on there, but it didn't have any of like the melodic elements. But like the bass sounds and wubs I made on that one, I was like really into that. I was like, okay, I know this song is like going to be something. It's not there yet. Do I have enough time to get it there? I don't know, but we're going to go for it. And so that was one. How you mentioned earlier, just a little bit ago, Evan, how like the best mix down is the one that you spend the least amount of time on. Like that definitely holds true to that song. Like I think that song only had like 7 versions of it. Like I didn't waste time on it. I was just like, okay, let's just, get this ready to release. And same with the mix down. Like I wasn't like fiddling around with it too much. And so I think it turned out like it doesn't sound like, it's overworked to me at least. And then Just Be was actually another like late addition to the album that started off with just it was just like a quick beat that I wrote, like a timer beat that I was like, okay, I'm, just drum, sub, and, a quick melody, just write something. And I have to give a lot of props to Shadow Star for helping me out with that one because
Shout out.
did a Whip Wednesday with that one, submitted it. He gave me some amazing feedback that like totally, because when I submitted it, I was like, oh, this is a cool beat, like maybe it just flush it out a little more, get some vocals on it. Like it was just like a pretty average beat at the time, but then like the feedback he gave me, it was a lot of, I don't even remember the proper terms for it, but so I had like the melodies going, and his recommendation was like to have like contrasting melodies. So like if this melody is like trickling down, have another one that's like trickling up at the same time. And that was like a totally new concept to me. And so I did that, and it really just like helped, like became a totally different song. And it was after that I was like, oh man, I think this one might deserve a spot on the album. And it's funny that how those songs like those, I mean, they come out when you're like not putting pressure on yourself. Like I wasn't trying to make it a song for the album. I was just writing a beat one day and then, okay, let me take this feedback and apply it. And then all of a sudden you have a tune that it's like, oh shit, like, no, this is one of my better songs I've written. So I'm glad that one like ended up getting a spot on there. And then, yeah, Tune In was another one that I just really liked, like the intro into like the weird bassy drop, but then going into like the more like dreamy kind of melodic chill moments after that I just, yeah, I don't know, that was one that it took some time, like the first drop especially, kind of like it was, I always knew it was there. It was one of them that I was like, okay, this song is here somewhere. It just like took me a little bit to find where it was, but I was like, all these sounds, like they're really working together, like the vibe works. It's just like not there yet. So that one took a little bit of time, just like playing around and trying and seeing what was like the best outcome of that. But yeah, I think those three are probably my favorite at this time.
Nice. Squidot in the Dojo TV chat says he loves how Tune In starts the album, and just like how that intro like rolls in and sets the stage for the whole album to come. I couldn't
Awesome.
agree more.
I want to give a special shout out to
Yeah,
the interlude in the middle as well. I love that interlude. The melody in that is like entrancing.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's funny with that one, that started as was like a full draft of a song that then I went back to that I was when, Dylan was like, "Oh, I want to get some interludes in there." And I remembered that song from a while back and was like, "Oh, this had a really, really cool intro," but I just made like a really long intro that it was like almost too long for a song. And so it didn't have the strings in there at that point. It just had like the footsteps that was actually I was walking around my neighborhood one day and it was like half snow, half gravel, and I was walking, I was like, it just sounds really cool the way like my footsteps are like going around in the snow and the gravel, and like I was wearing these big hiking boots, so my feet were kind of like dragging and shuffling along. And so I came back inside and like grabbed my phone and like did another walk around the block and recorded that. And so that's how that song happened. But so it like fit really well then with that I was like, oh no, like this was a full song, but the intro is definitely my favorite part of it, and I think I can like extend that and elaborate on that more and make that its own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. To kind of that, that inspiration of the footsteps in the snow on the gravel to start that tune is a really good segue to the next question we got in the chat, where Secret Guest asked, "What's your most common inspiration for writing a new track?" Or if it's not, there's not one most common. What what are some inspirations that have sparked new tracks for you?
So yeah, I'll start off by saying like I rarely feel inspired when I first sit down to start a track. Like that's I'm not. I know some people think you have to feel inspired to write, or that's like a belief out there, and that's like I'm now at the point where I'm comfortable enough writing that I'm not, like it's not a frustrating process like it was the first like year or two. So like I'm definitely excited when I sit down to write and I'm like, oh yes, I got to have a writing day or it's time to write a tune. But rarely am I like, oh, I feel inspired to write. Like it's more the progress and like, something coming from nothing that then inspires me to like keep writing. But a lot of times, like more often than not, when I start a track, I'll start with some sort of like atmosphere or how like the outer way that started with like those footsteps. So a lot of times I turn to omnisphere and like the noiseescapes or the textures, the playable textures, just like something to get like set a mood and a vibe. A lot of times I go for like the eerie, ominous, category of sounds and just like, or like some strings or something just to like get something there to then start riffing off of. And I mean, this past like week or two, I feel like my workflow has improved a lot after that no middling around weekly download that you recently mentioned, Luke, and just starting with like a riff of some sort. Like I've had really good, like this past week, had a really fun time like writing some cool tunes, just like taking a cool riff from Splice that I found and then throwing like Portal on there or Manipulator or some other like device to then make it more my own. But just like having that initial thing to start with is super helpful. And then you're not just like staring at a totally blank slate, which can be a little, intimidating at times. So just like getting some sort of like atmosphere or like personal, like recording of some sort, I feel like is kind of my favorite way to start a track.
Yeah, I think that's really important to note is that inspiration, like, like I'm the same. Like, inspiration rarely precedes like the work. Like obviously there's exceptions, and like, sometimes you get an idea for a remix or a flip or something that like, you know, you have an idea what you want to do when you start, but it also never ends up like the thing in your head. But like inspiration, yeah, like I said, doesn't usually precede like starting to work on a song. Like inspiration happens when you start working. Like,
Amen.
like it's just the way that it works. Like, you know, you sit down and play some chords on your guitar, or just doodle around in the MIDI roll. Like I do that all the time. And sometimes my favorite, like most interesting sounding stuff is just clicking notes in like, what, you know, maybe this. Oh, you know, I hear kind of something like this, and just screwing around with it. And then that, as soon as you stumble onto something that you like, that will inspire you and inform a lot of the decisions that follow.
Yeah, I had a mentor of mine. I remember talking to him once, and he was like, "How's music going?" And I was like, "Man, it's going good. I'm writing, but I'm not like as stoked on my new ideas as I am my last ideas, or as my like older ideas." And it was so obvious, but I just was not thinking of it in the moment. He's like, "How much time did you put into your old ideas versus your new ideas?" And then it hit me. And he was like, "Yeah, you know, if the more love you give your songs, the more love they'll give you back. Like, instead of being like, all my new ideas are shitty, find the time to go in and do a session and improve those shitty things." And viewing it more from like a draft perspective, and not putting the full pressure of like, I need to make this perfect immediately from the first go, and it needs to be the whole song.
Yes.
And just kind of knowing like, all right, I want this kind of drop, you know, let me lay out the idea as best as I can, get a draft, sit on it. Then you come back, now your like mental CPU is recharged. You can fully utilize it, and you're starting from the last place you're at. And yeah, the more you do that, obviously the better the ideas will be. I feel like there's no really magic to that aspect of it. It's just showing up and chipping away at it till it takes shape.
Yeah, totally. And to add to that, like me personally, like getting inspired with like a little rhythm that I'm beatboxing, or a melody that's playing in my head, or a lyric or something, like that happens all the time for me personally. But then, you know, there's waves of it coming in and going, being more or less. But there's not that many of my favorite tunes that have actually been finished that started with that type of inspiration and actually got finished the way I thought it would. Like, that's kind of rare. So what I've been focused on much more is my preparation. Like, if I'm feeling really inspired, I'm just going to like nighttime session, get that inspiration out and be like, okay, cool. I'm feeling melodies right now. Let me just write melody loops and bounce them out into Sparks folders. And I've reorganized my Sparks folders into like BPM and key, so that when I want to go write a song, I can just open up a folder, and then there's multiple ideas that all might probably work together, and I can just drag them in, and it's like my super loop is already written. And then I can spend my time on like, ooh, now here's a great bass line that'll go under that chord progression and melody loop combo. And here's a dope, here's a dope detail edit that I can do. I can get my time on that shit that you're usually burnt out on that first session by the time you get to. So focusing on preparation, I feel is a really good way to make your writing sessions much more productive, and you have a lot more energy for those happy accident inspiration moments to happen once you start actually writing the process with a good little batch of ideas that already exist. And yeah, that's working for me. But yeah, so, you know, secret guest, hope you got a lot of inspiration from that conversation on inspiration.
Yeah, preparation and drafts. That's really
drafts, and not, I love that, not putting all the pressure on the first session to like make a perfect track.
Man, yeah. Otherwise, you'll burn yourself out. Like, I've definitely fallen in that trap, and I don't know why that particular instance stuck out to me, but you know, it's easy to like look at your song 2 sessions in and be like, dude, this is ass. I'm so garbage. And
Dude,
it's like,
for real, like,
unless
yeah.
you're making really, really, really basic music, you need to realize that what you're doing takes time and takes revisions and takes fucking frustration. That's why not everybody's doing it.
Yeah, dude, even myself, who like my writing process is take as long as it takes to get the first draft out that day, or the song's probably not going to happen. And that can take, 16, 18, 20 hours some days. And in that, I get burnt out on that song 3 or 4 times. Like in that amount, like that's a long time to be working on the same song. Like I get burnt out on it in that session, and I have to go like chill on the couch and like take a little 15-minute break and forget about what I was doing, and then come back and like, okay, this section still sucks. Like, let me just try something else. Even if you want to push through and like that's what works for you, like you're still gonna get burnt out on it, and you have to understand that that's part of the process. And the same way that picking back up on that session a few days later or whenever, just like taking a break, like you just have to work with what you have, reimagine, keep working, trying new stuff. And it works just the same way, is that you eventually stumble onto the things that are great, and then you just recenter the whole track around that stuff. But yeah,
I'm actually surprised, Katie, that you were able to wrap up the album with such a time crunch towards the end there, because I feel like a really integral part of the process is sitting on the tracks for a couple days, doing some revisions and like trying to get a fresh perspective every time I come back. And while there are some things that are definitely mathematical or methodical that I can apply every time, I still feel like that time, away is always an aspect to it. So I'm curious, what are some things that you look for when you're doing those final mix downs, and what are kind of some like tools or methods that you use to consistently achieve those results?
I think a lot of it was just like a lot of listening, writing down things I noticed, cross that stuff off for the day, and then I would, come back like a day or two later. Like I would do like 3 or 4 tunes in a day, like a couple hours each, work on those as much as I could, and then like the following morning, or I do that like a couple days in a row, get through all the tunes and be like, okay, got through all of those. Now like the next morning, listen through all of them, write down, the stuff that's like bothering me still, go back, cross it off, like, rinse and repeat a ton of times, like so many times. And then you're like, oh, I crossed everything off the list, it's done. And then you listen a couple days later and it's like, no, not done. Filled up another page of notes of things to improve on. But yeah, I think, like I said, like if I didn't have that deadline, I would totally still be working on those songs. But like I'm glad I'm not, because I don't know, it like I said, like some areas probably could have been improved with like more time and like working on them more over and over again, but like other things probably would have like been made a lot worse from like trying to just keep perfecting and working on them. So about half of the songs on there I got to where I took a month or so off at a time and then would come back, and but some of those like more recent ones, like Shadows and Just Be, and I guess kind of Tune In, I had a couple months of that one from like when I wrote it to when I was finished. But some of those, like I feel like it just kind of, I don't know, in a way it comes out more naturally too when you're not like overworking stuff. Like I definitely do see a benefit to letting things sit and coming back with like a totally fresh perspective. But in a way too, it's like, I don't know, you can get caught up in like second guessing yourself, or like, trying to make things better when they're already good enough.
Yes.
Totally.
So it kind of prevented me from doing that. Yeah.
What kind of tools do you use as far as like checking your stereo, checking your LUFS, all that? Or are there any other checks that you do on your master, like the 3 extremes or anything like that?
Yeah, so I always have I have a rack that I made called All Extremes. So it has the 3 extremes, and then it also has the 30 to 60 band, the 60 to 120 band, and then the Ghost Zone, which is the sides, but listening to it in mono, but you're listening to just the sides. So I'm always flipping through like all of those and checking. And I also use tonal balance to like look and see how my stuff's hitting. Like I just have a couple albums of songs that I like that I imported in, and then you can get like I have like a Truth album for like one pre-save and like a Charles the First, so you can like import full albums of tunes you like, and then it'll show the tonal balance of that. So that was super helpful in getting that. I mean, honestly, I feel like I'm still learning a bunch when it comes to that and like stereo imaging and mixing. And, I try to reference a lot. I do that more now than I did. Like, I definitely did during the process, but, I still feel like I have gaps of knowledge when it comes to all of that. But definitely always checking the 3 extremes a lot, and that ghost band is super helpful in getting those like final finishing phases.
Sweet. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, is there any like final words of wisdom you want to impart? Places you want to send the listeners to follow you, etc., etc.
Final words of wisdom, man. Just stick with it. The more, honestly, I think like the biggest thing that got me to this point was just making a daily habit out of music early on.
Daily habit, indeed.
And just like really getting into a routine of that, because it's like, I mean, every morning I wake up, I do my journaling and then do finger drumming and then write for a couple hours, and that's just like, that is my schedule now, and that's how I start my day. And it's honestly awesome starting your day writing music. It really sets it up to have a great day ahead. But like, just like the more you can create like a routine about it, because at first it was very much like, okay, it's time to get your session in for the day, and like it'll be like that for a while until it is a habit. And now it's like the opposite, to where if I don't start my day like that, I just like feel off kind of. So it's not like a challenge for me to sit down at the DAW anymore like it used to be. So I think that would
That's
be
how
like my biggest piece of advice.
To the dark side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we need to make sure
and then, if you
everyone.
want to.
I was just gonna say, we need to make sure everyone listening right now understands that they need to go and buy this album on Beatport. Woo! You need to put it on repeat while you're sleeping on your computer in the other room. Isn't it already like number 1 in dubstep on Beatport?
Yeah, number 1 on the deep dub.
Yeah, it hit that on Saturday, which is insane.
Congrats.
It's incredible. We need to get it number 1 on the overall.
Thanks.
People. We need to show the love it deserves.
Yeah, it's climbing. It was like 84 yesterday, and then I saw this morning it jumped up to 54. So like, seriously, thank you to everyone who has purchased, listened, shared. I was telling the guys before we hopped on, like I was so nervous that no one was really going to be into it. So this is, I mean, it feels really good to have like a body of work out there and for people to be digging it. Like I definitely was nervous to kind of get it out there, but that just keep listening and sharing, and that's awesome. And I'm Slowform music on all of the socials. If you would like to follow or check out, I'll have some more releases coming up. I'm going to try to do like a monthly release all next year. I'm playing the Dojo TV house party next week on Wednesday. So if you want to catch a Slowform set from the comfort of your own home, I will see you next Wednesday there. And then I'll probably be putting that up before the end of the year as a good 30-minute mix. So yeah, we'll be playing some stuff from the album, and then also have like a handful of new tunes that I've written since then that I'll get to try out there. So stoked on that.
Sweet.
Very exciting.
Sweet.
Well, congrats, Katie. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for chatting with us, taking the time.
Thanks.
And to everybody listening, definitely go buy the album, or at the very least,
Do it
go
now.
Go follow Katie on Spotify or Apple Music. And, share a post or two. Share it with your friends, your grandmama, your grandpa. They'll love it, just like we do. And all the best to you. I'm very excited. I know this album's going to do a lot for you. So, yeah.
Amen.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks to the chat for tuning in tonight.
Yeah.
Big up,
Love
chat.
all you guys for real. Really helps liven up the show, getting your input throughout the episodes and your questions, and hope that you had fun and learned a thing or two. And go stream the album.
Go stream the
Do
album. Do it. All right, everybody. Peace. And peace among worlds.
Funny joke, man.
Two middle fingers. All right. Humans, thank you so much for being here with us. We highly appreciate you. Visit thehumanmusicpodcast.com for more episodes. You can find our socials, get some free sound packs, and you can find all our sponsors, including Dojo TV, where you can get free producer live stream classes from the Producer Dojo Senseis, and get in the private Discord where you can come and ask questions. There's also some free track feedback in there and stuff like that. There's so much good stuff. Highly recommend signing up. It's free. Then the weekly download, where you can learn from Il Gates and his private weekly group lessons and get access to over 250 more episodes in the archive for just $20 a month. Best deal on the internet when you want to upgrade your producer game. And of course, guest practices, where you can learn directly from Seth Drake at the Approach Institute. He's the best engineer we know, and your first class over there is free. Please go stream and buy Slowform's album. It's called Presence. The song of the week is the first track off it, called Tune In. Buy it on Beatport or on Bandcamp if you prefer, and go stream it on your favorite streaming service. All right, we'll see you next week with another episode, of course. Till then, humans, peace out and peace among worlds.